G'day everyone, welcome to Lubrication Explained. In this video we're going to talk about the differences between bulk and package delivery of lubricants to your site. So we'll talk about the mechanics of bulk delivery, we'll talk about some of the financial differences in the two options, and we'll also talk about some of the additional benefits of either going with bulk or with like a drum or an IBC solution. Alright, so let's think about the difference between a bulk versus a package delivery. So in both instances, your oil supply is probably going to turn up in some kind of truck, right? And really, it's just a difference in where it goes. So packaged materials are going to go to the warehouse, and bulk is obviously going to go into a bulk tank. Right now, the way that that pump over happens from the bulk truck to the bulk tank, it's generally going to be monitored on some kind of flow meter. You've probably got gauges set up on the tank as well to identify the amount of fill. And this is going to seem like a really obvious statement, but you pay for what is delivered, right? So again, let's say you've got a flow meter that's on the pump. They're going to bill you by the amount of volume that's actually delivered. That's a little bit different from our system when we deliver packages, because rather than paying by volume, you pay by package, right? So you probably buy the drum or buy grease cartridge or per IBC, and that actually does have a little bit of an impact, and which we'll go into a little bit later. Now, the other thing is, from an inventory management standpoint, these can be quite different. So if you imagine package, so all your drums are just going to go into the warehouse, where they'll stay presumably until they're used, and there's a little bit of inventory management involved because you want to rotate the stock for starters, right? So a lot of companies will have like a first in, first out kind of rule to make sure that you don't go past any shelf life or expiry date on any of your products. The other thing is, from a reconciliation standpoint, it can get really tricky too. Often you'll need to do physical verification, and if you have hundreds and hundreds of drums in your warehouse, the process of going through and physically reconciling those is an absolute nightmare. It's just an absolute pain, and it consumes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of cost. Bulk is different in that respect, right? So with bulk, it's obviously a big container, and you may have, let's say 10, at a particularly big site, you might have 10 tanks on site, right? Each with different products. And obviously it's mainly going to be, your main grade. So maybe your engine oil and your hydraulic oil. But what you'll do is obviously run down the tanks, and your oil supplier should be able to set you up with like a remote tank gauge. There are various systems, but some of the common ones are kind of like a laser level. So they'll bounce a laser off the fluid level and be able to identify what the level is within the tank. Now, that's great from an inventory management standpoint for a couple of reasons. One, you can have an instantaneous snapshot of the volume in your tanks at any given time, and it can be fairly accurate, right? So that's great from a reconciliation standpoint. The other thing is, it takes a load off your inventory management, because now your oil supplier knows exactly when they need to turn up with new product, right? So they know you're never going to run out, because in some senses you've outsourced that inventory management to them. So that can be of huge benefit as well. All right, so now let's talk about how lubricant is used in a packaged scenario. So you obviously have a drum or an IBC or a package or whatever, and you are going to be running it down. Now, how you extract the lubricant out of the package, there's infinite ways to do this, but generally it's probably going to be some kind of pump that you put through the hole at the top, right, to try and empty out that volume. Now, that's a bit of a contamination risk, right? So if we're constantly taking caps on and off, maybe we're taking the lid on and off, we're putting pumps in and out, there's contamination risk involved with that. We don't have that with a bulk solution. The other thing is, when you run down a drum, that drum is never truly empty, right? There's always going to be some volume, some residual volume left in the bottom. Maybe there's some volume which also clings to the walls. And you might say, well, how do you quantify empty, right? How much is actually left? Well, there's actually some regulations around this, right? So in the US, the definition is that no more than 3% by weight of the total capacity of the container can remain. Now, 3% is actually a pretty big number. In a 205 or 208 litre drum, that's like 6 litres that could be left unused. And the way that I look at it is if I went to the petrol station, or the gas station if you're in the US, and you paid for 50 litres of petrol, right? But they withheld 3% of the product that you paid for, you would be pissed. You would be really annoyed. And so this is kind of an opportunity gone begging. So from a cost standpoint, you are paying for 3% of the lubricant that you never get to use. And that's one of the huge differences between packaged product and bulk, because as we said before, with bulk, you only pay for what is delivered and therefore what you are actually going to use in your application. All right, let's talk about some of the other benefits. So in this empty drum scenario, right, this empty drum weighs about 20 kilos. It's about 20 kilos worth of steel in a drum. That's actually, if you do the equivalent, that makes it about 39 kilos of carbon dioxide is locked up in that drum. So it takes about 39 kilos of CO2 emissions to make an oil drum. Now, you've also got to add the 3% of lubricant by volume that you didn't extract, right? And so that's an additional roughly 12 kilos of CO2 emissions. Right? So in total, we could say that there's roughly 50 kilos, or for our friends in the US, there's about 110 pounds of carbon dioxide emissions that are wrapped up in an empty drum. So if you have some kind of sustainability criteria that you're trying to meet, or if your company is trying to reduce its greenhouse gas impact, you have goals around environmental progress and sustainability, this is really low-hanging fruit. So to go to a bulk solution is going to make a lot of headway. So here's an example. If an organization uses about 100,000 litres a year, by going from drum to bulk, you could defer about 25 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. Very simply. All right, so let's wrap this up with a bit of a summary. So I'm not trying to rag on drums all the time, because you pay per unit. Drums are generally available for many more products, so bulk is usually going to only be available for some of like your main grades, maybe your engine oils, your hydraulic oils, really, really common stuff that you're using on site. There's also a lot less infrastructure investment. So if you're not, a huge facility, or if you use many different products and can't afford to install a tank for each one, a drum or a package solution is going to be your go-to, right? But on the other hand, there are some really good benefits to going to bulk. First of all, you pay for what you use. Your supplier can monitor, as we said, your tanks, and so it can take a lot of that inventory burden off your organization. Potentially, there's better contamination control, right? So we talked about the idea of putting pumps in and out of drums and IBCs all the time, and that's a contamination point, a potential contamination risk. There are the potential for fewer greenhouse gas emissions if you avoid using lots of drums and having waste lubricant. And the other thing is that there's a lot less waste and there's a lot less disposal. So anyone who's used a lot of packaged product, it varies by country, but often it's really hard to get rid of drums, right? Because it's not easy to recycle them because they have to be cleaned first, right? So often you're having to get a third-party waste contractor and you have to pay them to take it off your hands. The other one that I didn't really put up on here, but is reasonably obvious to anyone in the business, bulk tends to be cheaper on a per litre basis as well. So you're getting the benefit, sort of the double benefit of it's cheaper on a per litre basis and you're able to use 100% of the product. So anyway, hopefully that's been a good explainer as to the differences between a packaged and a bulk solution and why you might want to choose either of the two. If you've got questions or comments, as usual, please leave them below. Otherwise, this has been Lubrication Explained.